The ink on the divorce papers was barely dry, yet Elena didn't look like a woman ending a 10-year marriage. She looked like someone who had just been released from prison. She checked her phone, a quick, flushed glance at a notification that wasn't meant for her husband to see. And the silence in the room shifted from mournful to conspiratorial. It wasn't just that she was leaving. It was the terrifying realization that she had already been gone for months, hiding her joy behind a mask of indifference. If you find yourself drawn to the quiet storms that wreck homes long before the front door actually closes, stay with me, because we are just beginning to uncover the wreckage. The boxes were stacked in the hallway like a barricade, brown cardboard walls separating the life they had built from the life Elena was sprinting toward. The apartment, usually filled with the soft hum of the radiator and the scent of Ethan's drafting pencils, now smelled of packing tape and stale coffee. Ethan sat on the edge of the beige sofa, the one they had saved up for 6 months to buy, his hands clasped tightly between his knees. He was staring at the floor, studying the grain of the wood, as if the answers to his misery were written in the oak. "I think that's the last of it," Elena said. Her voice wasn't sad. That was the thing that cut through Ethan's chest like a serrated knife. Her voice was light. It had a lilt to it, a buoyancy that he hadn't heard in years. She sounded like someone preparing for a vacation, not a divorce. Ethan looked up. Elena was standing by the door, checking her reflection in the foyer mirror. She smoothed the lapel of her coat, a new trench he didn't recognize. She looked radiant. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright and clear. There was no puffiness from crying, no hesitation in her movements. She was vibrant, alive, and completely detached from the devastation sitting 10 feet away from her. "You didn't have to pack so quickly," Ethan said, his voice rough. "The lease isn't up for another 2 months. You could have—" "No, Ethan, it's better this way," she interrupted, turning to face him. She offered him a small, pitying smile. It was the kind of smile one gives to a child who doesn't understand the rules of a game. "Clean break. We both need this. You know we do." "I don't know that," he whispered. "I never knew that." Elena sighed, a short exhale of impatience. She pulled her phone from her pocket. The screen lit up, illuminating her face. Ethan saw the reflection of a text message in her eyes, and for a split second, her expression softened into something intimate and hungry. It wasn't for him. "Ethan, please," she said, sliding the phone back into her bag. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. We've been stagnant for years. You're content with being just okay. And that's fine for you. It is. But I can't breathe here anymore. I feel like I'm drowning in okay. I'm up for the senior associate role next month," Ethan argued weakly, knowing it was futile. "Things are going to change." Elena shook her head. "It's not about the job, Ethan. It's you. You're just so safe." She said the word like it was an insult, twisting the concept of safety into something suffocating. "I need more than safe. I need to feel something again." A car honked outside, 2 sharp blasts. Elena's body reacted instantly. She straightened up, her hand flying to the door handle. The eagerness in her posture was undeniable. She was practically vibrating with the urge to leave. "That's my Uber," she lied. Ethan knew it wasn't an Uber. Ubers didn't honk like that. That was a signal. That was him. Julian. The name hung in the air between them, unspoken but heavy. Ethan hadn't confronted her about it, not really. He had seen the late-night notifications, the change in her wardrobe, the way she guarded her phone. He had chosen silence, hoping it was a phase. He had been wrong. "Right," Ethan said, standing up. He felt heavy, gravity pulling at his bones. "The Uber." Elena opened the door. The cold Chicago wind rushed in, chilling the sweat on Ethan's neck. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, looking back at him. For a moment, he thought she might say she was sorry. He thought she might acknowledge the 10 years of history, the struggle, the shared dreams. "You'll be happier too, eventually," she said, her voice bright and sure. "You'll see. This is a gift, Ethan." She didn't wait for a response. She stepped out into the hallway, the heels of her boots clicking sharply against the tile. She walked fast, towards the elevator, towards the street, towards the man waiting in the idling car. Ethan walked to the window. He watched as she exited the building. A silver Mercedes was waiting at the curb. A man in a dark suit stepped out, opening the passenger door for her. Ethan saw Elena laugh, a full throw-your-head-back laugh that he hadn't earned from her in half a decade. She got in, and the car pulled away, merging seamlessly into the flow of traffic, disappearing into the city lights. She was happy. She was gone. And Ethan was left standing in the silence of a home that was no longer a home, just a box of air and bad memories. The blue light of the smartphone screen was the only illumination in the bedroom. It cast a ghostly, artificial pallor over Ethan's face, highlighting the dark hollows beneath his eyes and the stubble that had gone untrimmed for days. It was 3:14 a.m. on a Tuesday, and Ethan Caldwell was awake, haunting a life he no longer inhabited. He wasn't breathing. He was scrolling. On the screen, Elena was laughing. It was a video posted 3 hours ago from a vineyard in Tuscany. The sun was setting behind her, painting the sky in violent shades of orange and violet. She held a crystal wine glass, the sunlight catching the rim, and beside her, Julian Vance looked effortless in a linen shirt, his arm draped possessively over the back of her chair. They clinked glasses. Elena threw her head back, that same free, unburdened motion she had used the day she left the apartment. Ethan watched the 5-second clip again, and again, and again. The apartment around him was silent, but it was a heavy, accusatory silence. In the year since she had left, the space had devolved. The drafting table in the corner, once the altar of his creativity, was buried under stacks of unopened mail and takeout containers. Dust motes danced in the beam of the phone light, settling on surfaces that hadn't been wiped down in months. He knew he was doing this to himself. It was a form of self-harm, precise and digital. Every swipe was a reopening of the wound. He tapped on her profile. The grid was a mosaic of a life upgraded. Elena at a gallery opening in New York, wearing a dress that cost more than Ethan's car. Elena on a ski trip in Aspen, her skin glowing against the snow. Elena and Julian, always Julian, smiling, touching, existing in a world where rent payments and grocery budgets didn't exist. She looked lighter, younger even. The caption on the latest post read, "Finally breathing." Ethan felt a physical blow to his chest. Finally breathing, as if the 10 years with him had been a time of suffocation. His phone buzzed, startling him. It wasn't a notification from her. It was an email from his firm's senior partner, marked urgent. "Ethan, we need the revisions for the Riverside project by 8 a.m. This is the 3rd extension. Don't make me have this conversation with you again." Ethan stared at the email, then flicked it away, returning to the picture of Elena in Tuscany. He zoomed in on her face. Was there a line of worry? A shadow of doubt? He looked for it desperately, needing to find a crack in the facade. some evidence that she missed him. But there was nothing. Her eyes were bright, focused entirely on the man holding the camera. He sat up, the sheets tangling around his legs. The air in the room felt stale, recycled. He looked at his own reflection in the dark window across the room, a silhouette of a man who had stopped moving forward. "She's not coming back," he said aloud. His voice was rusty, unfamiliar to his own ears. The realization didn't come with tears this time. It came with a cold, dry nausea. He had spent 365 days waiting for her to realize she had made a mistake. But looking at the Tuscany sunset, he realized the mistake was his. He was waiting for a ghost to walk through the door, while she was out there, alive, drinking wine, and forgetting his name. He looked at the phone one last time. Julian's hand on her shoulder. The ease of it. The ownership. Ethan's thumb hovered over the unfollow button. It felt heavier than a physical weight. To press it was to admit that the story was over. To press it was to sever the last optical nerve connecting him to her. He hesitated, his heart hammering against his ribs in a panic. If he clicked it, she would disappear. She would truly be gone. He closed his eyes. The image of her smile burned into his retinas. Then, with a sudden, jerky motion, he didn't just unfollow, he blocked the account. The screen refreshed. User not found. The blue light seemed to dim. The room went blacker, deeper. Ethan dropped the phone onto the mattress and put his face in his hands. He was alone. Completely, terrifyingly alone. But for the first time in a year, the air in the room felt like it was his to breathe. He turned his head and looked at the dusty drafting table in the corner. The sound of tearing paper was the only thing audible in the open-plan office. It was a violent, ripping noise that made the junior associates 3 desks away look up in alarm. Ethan stood over his drafting table, staring down at the shreds of the Riverside proposal. It was a safe design. Glass curves, soft landscaping, community-friendly open spaces. It was exactly what the client wanted. It was exactly the kind of work Elena had despised him for. Safe, breathable, cowardly. He swept the debris into the trash can. "You have a meeting with Sterling in 2 hours, Ethan," a colleague whispered, walking past with a coffee cup. "You can't go in there empty-handed." "I won't," Ethan muttered. He pulled a fresh sheet of vellum. He didn't pick up the soft HB pencil he usually favored. He reached for a thick charcoal stick and a fine-point ink pen. He didn't think about community flow or warmth. He thought about the feeling of the empty apartment. He thought about the cold, hard silence of a phone that would never ring. He began to draw. The lines were aggressive, sharp angles that cut into the skyline like knives, heavy use of raw concrete. Brutalism revived, but stripped of its nostalgia. It was a fortress, not a welcome center. It was a building that didn't ask for permission to exist. It was ugly in a way that commanded respect, imposing and unapologetic. It was the architectural embodiment of a scar. For 2 hours, he worked in a trance state fueled by a dark, cold energy he hadn't known he possessed. When he walked into the conference room, he slammed the portfolio onto the mahogany table. Mr. Sterling, the senior partner, adjusted his glasses. "The client wants a park pavilion, Ethan, not a bunker." "The client wants to be remembered," Ethan said, his voice flat and steady. He didn't stutter. He didn't hedge. Safe buildings get ignored. This forces them to look. There was a long, tense silence. Sterling looked at the drawing, then at Ethan. He saw the dark circles under Ethan's eyes, the unironed shirt, but more importantly, He saw the steel in his posture. "It's risky," Sterling said, tapping the paper. "But it has teeth." And 3 miles away, on the magnificent mile, the air smelled of expensive perfume and leather. Elena stood at the counter of a high-end boutique, a pair of Italian boots in her hand. They cost more than her old monthly grocery budget. She smiled at the sales associate, a young woman who looked at Elena with envy. That look, that was the drug Elena was addicted to now. The validation that she was someone who belonged here. "Just these today," Elena said, placing Julian's black American Express card on the glass counter. She tapped her fingers on the surface, humming softly. She checked her phone. Julian was supposed to meet her for lunch, but he was 20 minutes late. Again. "Ma'am?" Elena looked up. The sales associate's smile had tightened. She held the card out with 2 fingers. "I'm sorry, but the card was declined." The air in the boutique seemed to vanish. Elena felt a flush of heat crawl up her neck. "That's impossible. It's a black card. There's no limit." "The terminal says do not honor," the girl whispered, trying to be discreet, which only made it worse. "Try it again," Elena snapped, her voice rising. "The chip is probably dusty." "I tried 3 times. Elena snatched the card back, her hands trembling. She pulled out her phone and dialed Julian. It went straight to voicemail. "The subscriber you have called is not available." She stood there, the boots sitting on the counter like an accusation. The other shoppers were glancing at her, the beautiful woman in the trench coat who couldn't pay. The illusion flickered. For a second, she wasn't the girlfriend of a wealthy venture capitalist. She was just a woman with no money of her own, standing in a store she couldn't afford. She pulled out her own debit card, the one linked to the account she had retained from the divorce settlement. It had barely enough. "Use this," she said, her voice tight. As she walked out onto the bustling street, bag in hand, her phone finally buzzed. A text from Julian. "Sorry, babe, caught in a meeting. Bank flagged the card for suspicious activity because I bought that boat last week. Handling it. Dinner at Nobu?" Elena stopped in the middle of the sidewalk. She stared at the text. A boat. He bought a boat? She forced herself to exhale. Of course. It was just a bank error. It was just the messy reality of being rich. She typed back, "Can't wait, love you." But as she put the phone away, her thumb brushed the screen where Ethan's contact used to be. Ethan never bought boats without telling her. Ethan's cards never got declined. Ethan was boring. She gripped the shopping bag tighter, the leather handles digging into her palm, and walked faster, trying to outpace the sudden cold thought that she had made a terrible mistake. The applause in the grand ballroom of the Palmer House Hilton did not sound like praise to Ethan. It sounded like static. He stood at the podium, the weight of the Chicago Visionary of the Year award, cool and heavy in his hands. 3 years ago, he would have flushed red, stammered through a prepared speech, and looked for Elena in the crowd to anchor him. Tonight, he stood perfectly still, the stage lights reflected off his glasses, hiding his eyes. He had grown a beard, kept short and sharp, masking the softness of his jawline. His tuxedo was tailored to a frame that was 20 pounds lighter and significantly more muscular than the man who had sat on that beige sofa. "Architecture is not about shelter," Ethan said into the microphone. His voice was deeper, stripped of the apologetic tone that had once defined him. "It is about imposing order on chaos. It is about building something that cannot be left behind." He didn't smile. He didn't thank a partner or a muse. He walked off the stage with the efficient stride of a soldier, ignoring the hands reaching out to congratulate him. In the back of the room, he declined the champagne. He drank sparkling water, checked his watch, and calculated how soon he could leave. Success, he had learned, was just as lonely as failure, but the view was better. Across the city, the chaos was not theoretical. Elena stood in the center of the living room, barefoot on the cold marble floor. The penthouse was a mess, not of dirt, but of excess. Stacks of unopened auction catalogs, discarded suit jackets, and empty tumblers littered the surfaces. "It's a temporary liquidity issue, Elena. Stop acting like I'm bankrupt." Julian was pacing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, a glass of scotch in his hand. He looked older than the 3 years should have accounted for. His face was puffy, his charisma eroding under the stress of bad bets and market corrections. The venture capitalist title was thinning. People were starting to whisper the word gambler. "They called me, Julian," Elena said, her voice trembling but low. She had learned not to raise her voice. It only made him louder. "The jagged lease on the car, the country club dues, they called me. Because I changed my number and forgot to update the accounts," Julian snapped, waving a dismissive hand. Ice clinked against the glass. "I'm closing the tech health deal on Friday. It's 7 figures. You'll have your club dues." He walked past her, not seeing her, only seeing the obstacles in his head. He smelled of alcohol and expensive cologne, a scent that used to make her knees weak but now made her stomach turn. Elena sat down on the edge of the leather sectional. She felt small. The excitement of the new had long since evaporated, leaving her with the exhausting job of managing a man-child who believed his own hype. She picked up her tablet to distract herself, to find a window into a world that wasn't spinning out of control. She opened the local news app. The headline was bold, accompanied by a high-resolution photo. "The Brutalist King. Ethan Caldwell redefines the skyline." Elena stopped breathing. She tapped the image. There he was. Ethan. But not her Ethan. This man looked dangerous. He looked powerful. He was holding an award, staring down the camera lens with an intensity she had never seen directed at her. "What are you looking at?" Julian asked, flopping onto the sofa beside her, his mood suddenly swinging to needy. He draped a heavy arm over her shoulders. Elena quickly locked the screen, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Nothing. Just news." "Boring," Julian mumbled, burying his face in her neck. "Come on, let's go out. Let's go to the underground. I need a drink." Elena looked at the black screen of the tablet, seeing her own reflection. She looked tired. She looked trapped. "I have a headache," she whispered. "You always have a headache lately," Julian groaned, pulling away and standing up. "Fine. I'll go alone." The door slammed shut a minute later. Elena was left in the silence of the penthouse that wasn't theirs, surrounded by things they didn't own. She unlocked the tablet again. She zoomed in on Ethan's hand holding the award. No ring. No tan line. She remembered telling him he was stagnant. She remembered calling him safe. Tears pricked her eyes, hot and fast. She wasn't crying because he won. She was crying because she realized that the man she had left for being too weak had become the strongest thing in the city, and she was the one living in a house of cards. The invitation did not come in the mail. That was the first sting. 5 years ago, Elena would have been on the host committee. She would have been the one approving the font size on the RSVP cards. deciding between cerulean blue or midnight navy for the tablecloths. Now, she was sitting in her car, the engine idling in a Starbucks parking lot, holding a phone to her ear and listening to the dial tone ring for the fourth time. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was breathless, distracted. It was Clara, a woman Elena had once considered a best friend, a woman who had slowly drifted away like a balloon losing helium after the divorce. "Clara, it's Elena," she said, injecting a brightness into her voice that she didn't feel. "I know you're swamped with the gala prep, but I was wondering, did my invite get lost in the mail? The postal service is a nightmare lately." There was a pause. A long, excruciating pause filled with the sound of Clara typing on a keyboard. "Oh, Elena," Clara said, her tone shifting to that specific frequency of pity reserved for the fallen. "I didn't think you'd want to come. Given everything. It's Ethan's night. We thought it might be uncomfortable." "Uncomfortable? Don't be silly," Elena laughed. The sound was brittle, threatening to crack. "Ethan and I are adults. It's been 5 years. I just want to support him. It's the Calwell wing, Clara. How could I miss it?" Another pause. Elena gripped the steering wheel so hard her knuckles turned white. She needed this. She needed to walk into that room and prove that she wasn't the tragedy everyone whispered about. She needed to prove that her life with Julian was just as shiny, just as successful. "I can squeeze you in," Clara sighed, relenting. "+1? Yes, Julian and I will be there." "All right, I'll put you down. But Elena, he's different, just so you know." "I'm sure he is," Elena said. "We all are." She hung up and stared at the rain streaking the windshield. She had lied. She wasn't going to support him. She was going to be seen. She needed to see if he still looked at her with that puppy-dog devotion, that soft, pleading look that used to annoy her but now felt like the only water in a desert. Ethan Calwell did not look at the guest list. He trusted his team to handle the logistics. He stood in the center of the finished atrium, the space empty except for himself and the security guard by the door. The space was breathtaking. Walls of raw, polished concrete rose 40 feet high, meeting a ceiling of tessellated glass. The rain hammered against the skylight, but inside, it was silent. The acoustics were designed to swallow noise, to turn chaos into contemplation. He ran his hand along the cold stone of a pillar. This building was his autobiography. It was hard, impenetrable, and beautiful in a severe, lonely way. "Mr. Calwell?" Ethan turned. It was his assistant, a young man named Marcus who worshipped the ground Ethan walked on. "The final head count is confirmed, sir. 300 guests. The mayor, the board of directors, the press." Marcus hesitated. "And there was a late addition. A request from Clara's office." Ethan's face remained impassive. "Who? Ms. Elena Vance? And a guest?" The name hung in the vast, echoless room. Elena Vance. She hadn't kept his name. He hadn't expected her to. But hearing it spoken aloud, attached to another man's identity, felt like a phantom limb sensation. A twinge of pain in a part of him that no longer existed. Marcus looked nervous, waiting for Ethan to strike the name from the list. It was within his power. He could ban her. He could have security stop her at the door. It would be easy. It would be petty. Ethan looked back up at the glass ceiling, watching the gray storm churn above them. He remembered the way she had looked at him the last time they spoke, like he was a piece of furniture she had outgrown. "Let her come," Ethan said quietly. "Sir?" "Let her come," Ethan repeated, buttoning his jacket. He didn't say it with kindness. He didn't say it with hope. He said it with the cold curiosity of a scientist waiting to see what happens when a variable is reintroduced to a controlled environment. She should see what she built. The air in the new wing was cold, deliberately kept crisp to preserve the artwork and perhaps to match the architecture. It was a cavern of shadows and sharp light, where the elite of Chicago moved like schools of fish in shimmering silk and velvet. Elena stood near a pillar of rough-hewn limestone, clutching her clutch bag as if it were a weapon. Beside her, Julian was already on his third glass of champagne, his face flushed a mottled red that clashed with the sleek, monochromatic elegance of the room. "It's a bit grim, isn't it?" Julian said, his voice a little too loud, carrying over the polite murmur of the string quartet. He gestured loosely at the soaring concrete walls. "Feels like a mausoleum. Who wants to look at art in a bunker?" "Keep your voice down," Elena hissed, fixing a smile on her face for a passing socialite who didn't even glance their way. "It's brutalism, Julian. It's supposed to be imposing." "It's supposed to be cheap," Julian muttered, draining his glass. "Concrete is cheaper than marble. Your ex was always a penny pincher. Remember how he used to coupon for date nights?" Elena flinched. She did remember. She remembered how she used to hate it, how she used to roll her eyes when Ethan suggested a homemade dinner instead of a reservation at a Michelin star restaurant. Standing here now, surrounded by the physical manifestation of his genius, those memories felt less like evidence of his stinginess and more like evidence of his discipline. "I'm going to get another drink," Julian announced, wandering off toward the bar without waiting for her. Elena was alone. The relief was instantaneous, followed immediately by panic. She was adrift in a sea of strangers, in a building designed by a man she had discarded. She scanned the room, her heart beating a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She told herself she was looking for him out of curiosity. Just to see. Just to nod. Then, the crowd near the center of the atrium parted. It wasn't a dramatic entrance with trumpets. It was simply the gravitational pull of power. A group of board members and city officials stepped back, laughing at something. And there, in the center of the void they created, stood Ethan. Elena stopped breathing. She was looking for the man she had left, the man with the slightly ill-fitting suits, the stooped shoulders from hours over a drafting table, the soft, anxious eyes that always sought her approval. That man was not in the room. The man standing 20 feet away was a stranger. He was wearing a tuxedo that fit him with architectural precision, the black fabric emphasizing the breadth of his shoulders. His posture was terrifyingly straight, his hands clasped behind his back, listening to the mayor speak. His hair was styled back, revealing a face that had hardened. The softness was gone, replaced by the sharp angles of a man who had chiseled himself out of rock. He didn't look kind. He looked formidable. Elena felt her knees weaken, a physical buckling sensation that forced her to lean against the limestone pillar for support. This wasn't the safe choice she had mocked. This was a man who commanded the air around him. As if sensing eyes on him, Ethan turned his head. The movement was slow, deliberate. His gaze swept over the crowd, over the donors, over the press, and then locked onto her. Elena braced herself for the impact. She expected anger. She expected a sneer. She expected pain, but Ethan just looked at her. His eyes were dark and unreadable, flat as a pane of black glass. There was no spark of recognition, no flicker of old intimacy. He looked at her exactly the way he looked at the pillar she was leaning against, as a structural detail in the background, neither pleasant nor offensive, just there. He held her gaze for 3 seconds, an eternity. And then, without a change in expression, he turned back to the mayor and said something that made the group laugh respectfully. Elena felt the blood drain from her face. Beside her, a waiter passed with a tray of hors d'oeuvres, but the smell made her nauseous. She looked across the room at Julian, who was currently laughing too loud at a joke he didn't understand. A bit of crab cake stuck to his lip. Then she looked back at Ethan, the king in his castle. The realization hit her with the force of a physical blow. She hadn't just lost a husband. She had walked away from a masterpiece before it was finished, and now she was standing in the cold, watching the unveiling from the cheap seats. The terrace was a wind tunnel. The architects, Ethan, had designed it to jut out over the city, a concrete ledge suspended in the night sky. The wind here was sharp, smelling of rain and ozone, stripping away the expensive perfumes of the gala inside. Elena stepped out through the heavy glass doors. The noise of the party faded instantly, replaced by the low, steady hum of the city below. Ethan was standing at the railing. He wasn't looking at the view. He was looking at his phone, his thumb moving with efficient, bored precision. He didn't turn when the door clicked shut behind her. Elena shivered, though not entirely from the cold. She wrapped her arms around herself, the silk of her dress offering no protection against the sudden drop in temperature. She walked toward him, her heels silent on the damp concrete. "It's quiet out here," she said. Her voice sounded thin, snatched away by the wind. Ethan finished typing a message, locked his screen, and slipped the phone into his tuxedo pocket before turning to face her. The movement was smooth, unhurried. He looked at her with the same polite detachment he might offer a donor he couldn't quite place. "The acoustic dampening works well," he said. It was a priority for the design. He didn't say her name. Elena moved closer, stepping into his personal space. 5 years ago, this proximity would have made him nervous. He would have reached for her hand, sought her reassurance. Now, he stood his ground, rooted like the steel beams supporting the floor beneath them. "You look good, Ethan," she said softly, tilting her head in a way that used to make him smile. "Success suits you. I always knew you had this in you, somewhere deep down." It was a lie, and they both knew it. Ethan's expression didn't flicker. He didn't scoff or argue. He simply corrected her. "No, you didn't," he said. His voice was level, devoid of malice. "You thought I was small, and you were right. I was small because I was trying to fit into the space you allowed me." The words were precise, cutting through her attempts at charm. Elena felt a flush of heat rise in her cheeks. She needed to soften him. She needed to find the crack in the armor. "I didn't mean it like that," she lied again, her voice trembling. "We were young. We were struggling. Do you remember that apartment on Wicker Park? The one with the radiator that clanked all night? We used to lay on that mattress on the floor and talk about how one day we'd own the city." She smiled, a desperate, watery expression. "We were happy then, Ethan, in our own way." She waited for his eyes to soften. She waited for the shared history to pull on him. Ethan looked at her, and for the first time, a faint expression crossed his face. It wasn't nostalgia. It was confusion. "I remember the radiator," he said. "And I remember you crying in the bathroom because you couldn't afford the shoes you wanted. I remember you telling me that living with me felt like waiting to die. Elena gasped softly. I was angry. I didn't mean... It doesn't matter what you meant. Ethan interrupted, checking his watch. The gesture was casual, dismissing the emotional weight of the conversation entirely. It was a long time ago, Elena. I don't live there anymore. And frankly, I barely remember who lived there with you. He wasn't angry. That was the tragedy. If he had shouted, if he had accused her of betrayal, it would have meant he still cared. It would have meant she still held power over him. But this cool, clinical indifference was a void. He had looked at their 10-year marriage and renovated over it. I'm happy for you, Ethan, she whispered, the words tasting like ash. Truly. Thank you, he said. Enjoy the rest of the evening. The catering team is excellent. He nodded once, a professional dismissal, and turned away. He walked back toward the glass doors, toward the light and the warmth and the people who knew his name. Elena reached out, her hand hovering in the air, but she didn't call him back. She couldn't. There was nothing to say to a man who looked at you and saw a stranger. The door opened and closed. Ethan was gone. Elena was left alone on the ledge, the wind whipping her hair across her face, stinging her eyes. Through the glass, she saw a woman in a red dress approach Ethan. He smiled at her, a real, genuine smile that reached his eyes, and placed a hand on the small of her back. Elena stood frozen in the cold, while inside, the man she had thrown away was being toasted as a king. Elena remained on the other side of the glass, a spectator to a life she had voluntarily incinerated. Inside the atrium, the warmth of the room seemed to glow with a golden hue. She watched Ethan lean down to hear what the woman in the red dress was saying. The woman, elegant, poised, with a kindness in her face that Elena recognized she had never possessed, placed a hand on Ethan's forearm. It was a casual, intimate gesture. Ethan didn't pull away. He didn't look stiff. He covered her hand with his own, his thumb brushing her skin in a rhythmic, comforting motion. It was a language of touch Elena had forgotten existed. It was the language of two people who were not just lovers, but partners. There you are. I've been looking everywhere. The glass door slid open, breaking the seal. Julian stumbled out onto the terrace, the smell of expensive scotch wafting off him in waves. He was holding a half-eaten canapé and looked annoyed. It's freezing out here, Elena. Come inside. I want to leave. This crowd is too stiff for me. No one wants to talk business. Elena looked at Julian. His tie was crooked. There was a faint stain on his lapel. He was vibrating with the restless, frantic energy of a man who knew he was drowning, but refused to stop swimming. He was exactly what she had asked for: excitement, risk, volatility. Elena? Julian snapped his fingers in front of her face. Earth to Elena. I'm ready, she said. Her voice was hollow. She took one last look through the glass. Ethan was laughing now. It wasn't a performance. His head was thrown back. His eyes crinkled at the corners. He looked light. He looked unburdened. The heavy, sad architect she had left in that apartment 5 years ago was gone, buried under layers of concrete and success. In his place was a man who had rebuilt himself into something magnificent. She turned away and followed Julian back through the party, keeping her head down. She was terrified that Ethan might look up and see her, but she was even more terrified that he wouldn't. Being hated was one thing. Being invisible was a death sentence. They didn't speak in the elevator. The descent was rapid, the numbers on the digital display falling like a countdown. When the doors opened to the lobby, the valet was already pulling Julian's leased Mercedes to the curb. The rain had turned into a downpour, blurring the city lights into streaks of neon. "Get in," Julian muttered, running around to the driver's side to avoid getting wet. Elena stood on the curb. She looked up at the building one last time. The Calwell wing rose into the night sky, sharp and defiant against the storm. It was solid. It would stand for 100 years. She looked at the car. She looked at Julian, who was revving the engine impatiently. And then it broke. The facade she had carefully constructed for 5 years, the smiles for Instagram, the justifications, the mantra that she was happier, shattered. It didn't happen with a scream. It happened with a physical collapse of her internal structure. Her knees gave way. She grabbed the cold metal of a lamppost to keep from hitting the wet pavement. A sob ripped through her throat, a jagged, ugly sound that startled a couple walking by under an umbrella. "Elena, what the hell are you doing? Get in the car!" Julian shouted through the window. She couldn't move. The realization washed over her, colder than the rain. She hadn't left Ethan to find happiness. She had left him so he could find it. She was the anchor he had cut loose. "I'm sorry," she choked out, talking to the rain, talking to the building, talking to the ghost of the husband she had betrayed. "I'm so sorry." But the building didn't answer. It just stood there, magnificent and unreachable, while she stood in the gutter, waiting for a man she didn't love to drive her home to a life she couldn't afford. The divorce papers had promised her freedom. Standing in the shadow of Ethan's success, she finally understood the fine print. She was free, and she had never been more lost.